Thank you very much. Thank you, Marlijn. Then we finally got to the last speaker, Frans.
Yes, thank you, Jan. You're all awake still? Not dying for coffee or anything?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Sorry, just another half hour. So the title Jaap gave me was a bit too long, but there were elements in there of going from research to clinical products with gaming. So I will talk about all these elements just a little bit. First of all, I have a background as a physical therapist, studied human movement science, but as you probably know or already saw, I work now for Motek Medical. So this works. There's a disclaimer here. Although I like to think that I still are a bit of a researcher, of course there is a conflict of interest working for our company, and you can appreciate that and what we're doing. So basically, if we are moving in everyday life, this should be a video. Yes. You're not aware of your locomotion, of your balance, your motor control, your muscles. Basically, you just move and you do the stuff that you like to do. Until there is a moment when you're not capable of doing that because of a trauma, a disease, or natural aging. And as we're living in an aging society, it is very important to help these people, to treat them, to keep them active and mobile for as long as possible, to measure what exactly is the problem there. And of course, biomechanical parameters can help there. That's important either to diagnose what the exact cause of the problem, the movement disorder is, to see if there is some sort of prognostic value, if we can understand to what level a patient can recover before we even start rehabilitation, and to monitor progression to see if they are increasing or staying the same. Well, unfortunately, and I think you will all agree with me, most of the commonly used assessments, at least in physical therapy and a lot in rehab as well, are not very sensitive in what they can measure. So, for example, they cannot measure any differences between Andrew's balance and my balance, right? Probably there will be some differences. They often also have a ceiling effect, and one of the best known examples, of course, is the Berg balance scale. You need to have a very deteriorated balance control to score lower on that test, but also if you want to measure height in these, or body length in these individuals, there will be a ceiling effect, of course. And finally, they are limited in what they can actually measure. Well, what do I mean with that? I don't like these pictures very much, but I use them quite often. So if we're looking at balance and locomotion, there are different aspects. Very schematically, there are the physical capabilities of performing a movement task, of stepping over a doorpost in order not to fall. There's of course the visual information, the processing of visual information in order that you need to be able to see the doorpost to step over it. And finally, any ideas? What will be the third one here? Yeah, vestibular, that's not in here. I mean the cognitive elements, which are absolutely right. So the cognitive elements, you need to know that you have to step over the doorpost to not to fall, or you need to be able to perform some sort of dual task, or have your cell phone or anything. Well, this scheme can be drawn in a similar way with an individual who's performing a task in a certain environment, and functioning and everyday functioning is happening in this interface. Well, what we like to think, at least at Motek, and I think a lot of the researchers here agree as well, is that rehabilitation technology can help to do a better job in assessing and measuring human balance and locomotion, and also in treating these individuals. Well, this is our old logo, which still illustrates, I think, nicely what we do. This logo is also a result from a sister company we had, Motek Entertainment, but that's not important for now. So basically what we try to do is to come up with new parameters, new assessment tools, new products, new algorithms and paradigms based on the latest technology. But most important is that we want to develop that to help patients to better assess them and to better treat them and to speed up rehabilitation processes. And basically there's a lot of information already available. So I think all these journals are very familiar to you. Each of these journals every month come up with new ways or better ways or validation of methods to better help our patients. Well, eventually, of course, we need to make sure this information, and maybe there is another conflict of interest between the companies and what you as a researcher want to do, because there's only one way, I think, that this information reaches the persons for whom they were originally developed for, the patients, and that is via products, tools, systems. So I think that the companies can play an important role there. So I talked about a rehabilitation technology to measure balance and locomotion. Well, what kind of technology? Basically, there's a lot of out there, and if you take a walk on the exhibition space within the next week, you will see a lot of companies who do really great stuff. For example, I think most of you are familiar with motion capturing, different systems, different ways of doing that. It can be with optical cameras or inertial sensors. You can measure weight distribution and ground reaction forces, uses force plates. And you see more and more developments, as we saw in the previous talks as well, with virtual reality. Sound can be important, but also treadmills. Treadmills can be instrumented. You can even place them on a movable platform for really advanced protocols and research studies. Well, what we did at Motek is we developed a software interface to communicate to all these different hardware elements, and with this software you can integrate basically any hardware device that you are interested in. And the biggest strength of the software is in this final part here, where you can create your own application and create your own research protocol to study what exactly works, what doesn't work, what kind of settings are required for the patients to optimally respond to basically what you want them to do. Well, this is what the software looks like, and then you could create an interface for daily operation and to select your different applications. And this is then the system that was already mentioned before, the Grail system, in which all these different hardware settings are integrated, and you can run either clinical applications or more advanced research programs. And as you can see, you can manipulate either the visual flow, you can manipulate the physical environment to study, for example, responses to tripping and slipping situations, or you can ask the subject to perform a cognitive dual task while he's performing a motor task. Okay, so that's very nice. So there are a lot of possibilities, but that's not new. Now, basically the scope of what I wanted to talk to you about is how we look at this development of research protocols and knowledge, and how to bring that into more accessible clinical products. Well, this Grail system we just saw, and for those of you who know the Karen system, it's also in the top of a pyramid. So that's a highly advanced system which can be used for high-level clinical services, but most of the time used for research questions. And that can be used to either test if something is working, to experiment, to come up with new stuff, and to basically do all the exciting new stuff which are nice for researchers. But, well, this is the example of the Karen system, but you can also look at it from a robotic point of view. So in the Netherlands there's a development, the LOPAS, which is a high-end robotic device which can be used to manipulate all elements during walking in the exoskeleton. But eventually we want to bring this knowledge into the clinic where it can be accessible and used for as much patients as possible. So we can define a level just below that where we still are working with high-tech hardware, but this hardware setting now have very dedicated settings. So these products and devices need to have very clear treatment goals or assessment goals, and those need to be validated. Usability becomes of interest, and it's, well, of course not your interest, but these products also need to be certificated to use in clinical practice. And here are some examples of those type of devices. Well, and finally, we also need to, and Andrew talked about that a little bit, we need to also think what can we offer for patients to use in a home situation in order to make it available to practice as much as possible in home rehabilitation. Of course, safety becomes an issue there. You cannot ask a patient to do very challenging balancing tasks in a home environment where there is a risk that they will fall. So there are a lot of challenges there still. I can say from a Motek Forcelink point of view, we haven't entered this field yet. So we are more in the top levels here. Well, and I think, and this is also what we are talking about with our research partners, that there need to be some sort of interface between all these levels. So define what works and test, do the validation, so there's some sort of interaction between these levels in order to improve your product, but also improve the clinical services. And we need to think of a solid clinical infrastructure. In some situations, for example, you need a full-blown gait analysis, and then this data can be used as an input for a device here in the orange level. And maybe the data needs to be fed into another system as a sort of interaction. Because eventually the goal is, of course, to help patients, to treat them. For example, this TV commercial in the Netherlands, in order to reduce the risk of falling or even prevent falling in case they have an increased risk of falling. Well, as I already said, I very strongly believe that there should be a very clear collaboration between the different stakeholders that work in this field. And I think there are not that many examples in which a scientific result is immediately implemented in clinical practice. I think the industry can play a part there, but we really also need each other. Because, for example, if you think about an innovation, a new tool, a new algorithm, there is an interaction and a collaboration between a company and a university in order to develop a product which can be used in the clinical services. And eventually also there needs to be a clear validation protocol in order to prove the effectiveness of a product. And the truly clinically accepted products, and with that I mean products there for which there is also reimbursement structure, happen in this exact interface. Again, this picture I didn't like, but it's very easy to illustrate stuff. So, one brief example with what we've been working on. This is an example of the Karen system, and maybe you recognize this test subject here. This was the previous presenter. It was not Andrew. We looked at the compensational strategies that patients can use to preserve balance and to also be able to adapt their walking pattern to an environment if the environment requires so. So we put the patients on the Karen system and we perturb them, so we destabilize them. And while they were destabilized, we also asked them to react to an object in the virtual environment. So this is a sort of an adaptation task. So they were destabilized. We measured to what extent they were destabilized. We also presented an adaptation task. And then we measured what kind of strategies these patients used to be stable and to be adaptive, and what kind of interaction between those are. And that learned us something not very surprising, but it was nice to see, that the compensation that patients can use, but not always use, were very simple. They can widen their step width, they can increase their step frequency, which you can imagine if there is some sort of target at which you need to respond to, that you maybe take smaller steps in order to make a very rapid response to the visual object, and they can increase their step width. So we used exactly this information to develop a training environment. And in this situation we want to challenge patients constantly to adapt all their spatiotemporal parameters and go through the whole landscape of step length, step frequency, step width, while they were walking. And I don't know if there's any physiotherapists in the audience, but it's very difficult if you want to exercise with the patient, and while he or she is walking, and you want to explain him, well, take a wider step, take a smaller step. So it's very difficult for these patients to process that information and adapt their walking pattern accordingly. Well, in this game, every time the patient puts his feet on the treadmill, there's a laser beam shooting out of his feet, and he can direct the laser beam into different directions. And if he takes a longer step, the beam increases in length. And this way they have to collect all these pickups. These pickups are just randomly in an environment, and the more pickups they collect, the more beautiful the environment gets. And you don't need to explain anything, patients just start walking, and if they play the game appropriately according to this research program, which was the foundation of the game, the environment becomes more immersive and more beautiful. Well, another example is that we also implemented this on the grill system, and that's now tested at the military rehab center in Doorn with stroke patients on the clinical validity. So that was in the top level, if you remember, the top of the pyramid, and then we started thinking, well, maybe this way of treatment can also be useful for a more accessible and a more cheaper product. So we looked what is exactly the hardware we need in order to challenge patients to play this game, to challenge them to change their step width constantly. And then we don't need the movable platform anymore. We don't need the full 3D motion capture system anymore. We don't need the semi-cylindrical screen anymore. So we developed a more simple treadmill. In this test setup, we used the Kinect sensor and a more simple virtual reality environment. And this product only has the 5 rehabilitation games that we developed in this research program, and that can be used. Oh, no, I changed the camera. And hopefully a product like this can be suitable for daily clinical practice in a clinical environment. Well, we started this, and we planned to launch the product in April 2014, but unfortunately there are other elements that are important here. So we still needed a lot to do. And to give you just some of the examples that we encountered at that point, is that if you want to bring a product like this to the market, you need to improve your prototype. You need to do pilots for clinical trials. Eventually, of course, you need to perform a randomized controlled clinical trial. Otherwise, it is completely useless to go to the market with a product like this. Even though there is a full PhD thesis proving all the mechanisms that are the biomechanical foundation of the product, and which is not in this line is the certification, which eventually you also need in order to get the reimbursement structure. So we encountered this problem, and we are very happy now that in the Netherlands there's a new initiative. It's called Profits, and in this initiative they are now building an infrastructure of clinical data and collecting on a routine basis clinical data, with the eventual goal that if there is, for example, an ID for an RCT, or there is an example that you want to test a prototype of a product like this, you can easily get access to patients with a specific combination of parameters which you want to test. So that's really nice. And we are even now talking to the Rehabilitation Institute in Chicago, where they also are willing to adapt this specific infrastructure in order to perform RCTs and prototype testing of products more rapidly. But eventually we also need that type of data for marketing and sales purposes. Well, what we did try to do ourselves a year ago is, because we had this more accessible product, we could easily put it in a rehab center for testing. So we approached several centers, and the first thing they asked was, okay, do you have a research question? I said, well, not really a research question. I want to know if the system works. Well, the researchers there said, and the clinician, then we do need to do some structurized type of data collection, and for that we need to apply for approval by the Medical Ethical Commission. I said, well, that takes too much time, so isn't there a way where we can perhaps just put it into the routinely clinical practice, that as a clinician you say, well, I want to do gait training and now I use this product. I said, well, maybe that's an opportunity. And then we found out that it is very difficult for a physical therapist or a clinician in the Netherlands to do that, because, for example, and I found it always very interesting to talk to my wife, who's a physical therapist in a rehab center in the Netherlands. And she explained me, yeah, Frans, you can think you can place a product in a center like that, but if I have a patient and I have only 3 weeks before this patient has to go home, I will start working on my transfer. And it's very nice that you have a nice product, and it can be maybe very, very effective, but it is completely dependent of the treatment goal and of the goal of the rehab for this patient in order to go to the home situation. So perhaps those are also elements we need to think about when developing these type of products and when trying to come up with ways to implement them in the clinical rehabilitation services. So I think sometimes we need to think more in the scope of the therapist instead of the researcher. Well, and finally, final slides are, we very strongly believe in the networking. We are very happy now in the Netherlands that we have these highly advanced rehabilitation technology products installed in several centers. We have a very, very strong collaboration with the VU Medical Center and also with Maastricht. And it's very good to see that those centers also start making their own connection for completely different topics or different questions. Well, this network is, of course, is also broadening to worldwide. So we have a very strong collaboration with Strathclyde University as well, and with Cardiff University. And what also is a nice example that, for example, Strathclyde University is now setting up a collaboration with BASIC, which is a clinical service center for stroke patients. And basically they have completely different questions, and Strathclyde is managing and controlling that research question, and we are supporting in that, so that's nice. And eventually we are also working on these research collaborations, which are a lot more challenging, I think, with the US and China recently. So thank you for your attention.